People in the town still argue about the exact moment it all began. Some say it started the day Daniel laughed at nothing in the middle of the marketplace. Others say it began when Clara walked into church wearing a red dress and shoes that didn't match, smiling as if she knew a secret no one else did. What everyone agrees on is this: when those two met, something strange and unforgettable was set in motion. A madman, they whispered. A mad woman, they replied. And yet, against every warning, they chose each other. Daniel had always been different. Not dangerous, not cruel, just off in a way that made people uneasy. He talked to himself sometimes, not loudly, just under his breath, as if finishing conversations no one else could hear. He laughed at sad moments and went quiet during jokes. Kids followed him from a distance, daring each other to get close, while adults shook their heads and muttered about fate and bad blood. But Daniel also helped old women carry groceries, fixed broken chairs for free, and fed stray dogs with the little money he had. That contradiction made people uncomfortable. They prefer simple labels. Madman was easier. Clara arrived in town like a gust of wind that slammed doors open. No one knew exactly where she came from. She rented the old blue house near the river, the one people avoided because of the constant damp smell and cracked walls. She sang at odd hours, sometimes at dawn, sometimes deep into the night. Her laughter rang too loud. Her silence felt too heavy. One day she wore bright colors and danced barefoot in the rain. The next, she sat by the river for hours, staring into the water like it was staring back. Mad woman, they said. A perfect match for Daniel, others joked, not realizing how close to the truth they were. Their first meeting was ordinary, which somehow made it extraordinary. Daniel dropped a bag of apples in the street. Clara stopped to help him pick them up. Their fingers touched. They froze. For a moment, the noise of the town faded. No sparks, no dramatic music, just two people looking at each other as if they'd finally found someone who spoke their silent language. Clara smiled. Daniel didn't laugh. He just nodded, like he'd been expecting her. From that day on, they were seen together, sitting on benches, walking by the river, sharing bread on the steps of closed shops. They didn't explain themselves, and that bothered everyone. People wanted reasons, stories, warnings. Instead, they saw two lonely souls finding comfort in shared strangeness. Rumors grew faster than facts. Some said they encouraged each other's madness. Others claimed they were cursed. A few secretly watched them with envy, wondering what it would feel like to be that free. When Daniel announced he was getting married, the town reacted as if he'd declared the sky was falling. When it became clear the bride was Clara, the shock doubled. Whispers turned into arguments. Friends tried to talk him out of it. Clara's landlord warned her about commitment. Two broken minds don't make a whole, someone said loudly enough for them to hear. Daniel just smiled. Clara squeezed his hand. They didn't argue back. They didn't defend themselves. That silence made people even more nervous. The wedding was small, held in the old community hall. No grand decorations, no fancy food. Still, the place was packed. Some came out of concern, others out of curiosity. People wanted to see how this would go wrong. Daniel stood at the front, calm and steady. Clara walked in, not glowing like brides in movies, but real and raw, her eyes shining with something that looked like hope mixed with fear. When they exchanged vows, their voices trembled, not from confusion, but from the weight of choosing each other in a world that expected them to fail. At first, married life seemed almost normal. They fixed up the blue house together. Daniel painted the walls. Clara planted flowers that shouldn't have grown but somehow did. They laughed, argued, made up like any other couple. For a while, the town relaxed. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe love had settled them. Maybe the madman and madwoman had found balance. But peace has a way of making people forget why they were worried in the first place. Small things began to change. Daniel started waking up in the middle of the night, pacing the house, whispering apologies to no one. Clara's singing turned sharp, almost angry. Neighbors heard arguments through thin walls, then sudden silence that felt worse. Some mornings, Clara wouldn't come out at all. Other days, Daniel wandered the streets alone, eyes hollow, like he'd left something important behind at home. The town noticed. The whispers returned, darker this time. People said marriage had made things worse. That love had opened doors better left closed. That two unstable souls couldn't carry the weight of real life together. No one asked them how they were doing. No one knocked on the blue door. They just watched, waited, judged. One evening, a scream cut through the air near the river. By the time people arrived, there was nothing to see. No blood, no struggle. Just Clara's red scarf floating on the water and Daniel standing on the bank, shaking, unable to speak. He was taken home, questioned, pitted, feared. Clara returned hours later, soaked and silent, refusing to explain where she'd been. That night, the blue house lights stayed on until morning. After that, everything felt tense, like a held breath. Daniel and Clara moved like strangers around each other, close but disconnected. Love was still there, but something else had joined it. Fear, guilt, secrets. The town felt it too, even if they didn't understand it. They sensed that whatever they'd been watching from a distance was about to reach a breaking point. People thought they knew what madness looked like. They thought they knew how this story would end. But the truth was far more complicated and far more unsettling than any rumor. Because what was really happening inside that blue house had nothing to do with labels and everything to do with pain, love, and a choice that would soon change everything. And just when everyone believed the worst had already happened, Daniel made a decision that would force the town to finally confront the question they'd been avoiding from the start. Were they witnessing the downfall of two broken people, or the beginning of something no one was prepared for? Daniel's decision didn't come with an announcement. There was no dramatic speech, no public breakdown. It started quietly, the way most dangerous things do. The next morning, instead of wandering the streets, he stayed inside. He cleaned the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors that were already clean, organizing shelves that didn't need order. Clara watched him from the doorway, her expression unreadable. She wanted to ask what he was doing, but something in his eyes told her not to. It wasn't anger or madness. It was focus. That unsettled her more than shouting ever could. Their silence grew heavier by the day. They spoke about small things only. Food. Weather. Whether the flowers needed water. Anything but the river. Anything but that scream. At night, they lay side by side without touching, staring at the ceiling like two people trapped in the same dream but living different nightmares. Love was still there, but it felt fragile now, like glass already cracked. The town filled the silence for them. Stories twisted and multiplied. Some claimed Clara tried to leave, and Daniel stopped her. Others said Daniel had followed voices to the river and Clara went after him. No one had proof. No one cared. Fear doesn't need facts. It only needs imagination. And imagination was something this town had plenty of. Long before Clara came into his life, Daniel had learned what it meant to be watched. As a child, he'd been the boy teachers didn't understand. He struggled to focus, drifted into his own world, reacted too strongly to small things. When he cried, people told him to toughen up. When he laughed, they told him to be serious. Over time, he learned to stay quiet, to hide confusion behind smiles. But silence doesn't cure anything. It just pushes it deeper. Clara's past was no less tangled. She grew up in a house where emotions swung like doors in a storm. Love came loud and left just as loudly. She learned early that feelings could be beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Singing was her escape. Water was her calm. When life became too heavy, she went where sounds softened and thoughts slowed. That night at the river wasn't an accident. It was a habit she never explained to anyone, especially not Daniel. But secrets don't stay buried forever. One afternoon, Daniel left the house without telling Clara where he was going. He walked to the old clinic at the edge of town, a place people avoided because it reminded them of weakness. He sat in the waiting room, hands shaking, heart racing, wondering if this was courage or surrender. When the nurse called his name, he almost stood up and walked away. Almost. Instead, He followed her inside, carrying years of confusion he'd never put into words. Meanwhile, Clara stood by the window, watching the road. She felt the shift the moment he left. Something was happening. Something she couldn't control. That terrified her. Control was the one thing she clung to when everything else felt unstable. She thought about the river again, the way the water wrapped around her legs, the way it drowned out thoughts without asking questions. She didn't go. Instead, she sat on the floor and cried quietly, hoping Daniel wouldn't hear when he came back. When he returned, hours later, he said nothing. Clara searched his face for answers, but found only exhaustion. That night, he slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Clara stayed awake, listening to his breathing, wondering what he'd done and whether it would pull them closer or push them further apart. Days passed, then weeks. The town noticed changes again, but they couldn't decide what they meant. Daniel seemed calmer in public, more grounded. Clara, on the other hand, grew restless. She paced more, sang less. The balance between them was shifting, and neither knew how to talk about it without risking collapse. They loved each other, but love doesn't come with instructions, especially when both hearts are already bruised. One evening, a letter arrived with no return address. Clara found it tucked under the door. Inside was a single sentence written in careful handwriting. Some truths don't stay quiet forever. Her hands trembled as she read it again and again. Was it a threat? A warning? A cruel joke? She didn't tell Daniel. Not yet. She folded the letter and hid it in a drawer, hoping fear would fade if ignored. But fear only grows in the dark. Daniel began attending meetings outside town, saying he needed time to think. Clara nodded, smiled, pretended she understood. In reality, she felt like she was being left behind. The town's eyes followed her everywhere now. At the market, at the river, at the door of the blue house. She felt judged not just for who she was, but for who she loved. That pressure pressed against old wounds, reopening them. Late one night, Clara stood by the river again, staring at her reflection. The water looked calm, inviting. She thought about how easily people believed the worst, how quickly love turned into suspicion. She wondered if she was truly mad or just tired of pretending to be normal. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned sharply, heart racing, only to find Daniel standing there, breathless, fear in his eyes. Neither spoke. The river flowed between them like a question neither knew how to answer. Back in town, whispers turned into plans. People talked about interventions, about protection, about doing what was necessary. No one asked Daniel or Clara what they needed. They decided for them. That's how fear works. It convinces itself it's doing the right thing. As the night deepened, Daniel reached for Clara's hand. She hesitated, then took it. Their fingers intertwined, not with certainty, but with desperation. Whatever was coming, they felt it closing in. And somewhere between love and madness, between truth and rumor, the line was about to blur in ways neither of them could stop. The days that followed were a delicate dance between routine and chaos. Daniel woke at the same time every morning, brewed his coffee in silence, and sat by the window watching the world wake up. Clara moved around the house like a shadow, humming softly, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging, leaving behind a trail of small disturbances that only she seemed to notice. Together, they were quiet, but the quiet was heavy, layered with things unspoken. Love existed in the same room as tension, each feeding off the other, neither willing to give in completely. Daniel's past began to reveal itself in subtle ways. On certain nights, he would write in notebooks he kept hidden under his bed. Pages filled with sketches, notes, fragments of conversations he had with himself, and sometimes names he whispered over and over. Clara would sometimes peek over his shoulder, but he would close it quickly, refusing to explain. She didn't push. Curiosity was dangerous when dealing with Daniel. It wasn't that he was violent, he wasn't, but his mind worked in ways most people didn't understand. People often labeled what they couldn't see as madness, but Daniel simply saw the world differently, and that difference sometimes scared others. Clara had her own shadows. When she was alone, she would pace the blue house's old wooden floors, hands running over the cracks and knots in the wood, murmuring things only she could hear. Her singing had always been her refuge, but lately, her voice carried an edge, almost bitter, as if it was trying to reach someone or something that wasn't there. She had grown up learning to mask her emotions, but Daniel had a way of peeling those layers without even touching her. It was a gift and a curse. Their connection was intense, uncomfortably close at times, yet at the same time, it made them vulnerable to the world around them. Rumors in the town never faded. People whispered about the couple behind closed doors. They claimed to see shadows moving inside the blue house late at night, lights flickering even when the power was off. Some swore they heard screaming, while others insisted it was laughter, too manic to be happy. Children were told to stay away, and adults kept their distance. Daniel and Clara became a kind of living legend, an example of what happens when two unpredictable forces collide. But the truth was far stranger than gossip could ever capture. Then there were the visitors. People who arrived at the Blue House, seemingly out of nowhere, claiming to have insight into Daniel or Clara's pasts. Some brought letters, others small objects that seemed innocent but carried meaning neither of them fully understood. Clara would accept these visitors with polite curiosity, Daniel with guarded suspicion. Every meeting left more questions than answers, pulling them deeper into a web that the town couldn't see, but that felt increasingly suffocating. Every visitor was a reminder that their lives were not their own anymore, that secrets have a way of dragging themselves into the open, whether you like it or not. One afternoon, Clara discovered a hidden compartment in the floorboards of their bedroom. It was a small space, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Inside were objects that belonged to someone else, photographs, trinkets, letters written in shaky handwriting. She didn't recognize the names, but the tension she felt was immediate and undeniable. Daniel had never mentioned this, and when she asked him, he simply shook his head and said, "Some things are better left alone." But Clara couldn't leave it alone. She began to piece together clues, following threads that led to questions she didn't dare speak out loud. Each discovery made the air in the house heavier, each secret a stone weighing down the fragile balance between them. Daniel noticed Clara's growing restlessness and tried to respond in his own way. He began leaving small notes around the house, cryptic but tender, sometimes apologizing, sometimes reminding her that they were in this together. Yet, even his words carried weight that Clara couldn't always interpret. Sometimes they comforted her, sometimes they raised more doubts. The problem wasn't a lack of love, it was understanding. Two people with their own pasts, their own shadows, trying to exist together in a world that never stopped watching. That's where the tension lived, in the spaces between words, in the moments no one else could see. Late at night, Clara started hearing strange sounds outside the house. At first, she thought it was the wind rattling the windows, or an animal wandering through the yard. But the sounds were too deliberate, too patterned to be random. Footsteps pacing just beyond the edge of the porch, a faint tapping against the door, whispers carried on the cold air. She didn't tell Daniel at first, afraid of what he might do or say. When she finally mentioned it, his reaction was not what she expected. He didn't dismiss her fear. He didn't become angry. Instead, he grew silent, his face tightening, and spent the night listening, too. They stayed awake together, side by side, neither moving, each waiting for the other to break the silence. The blue house itself seemed to take on a life of its own. Floors creaked in patterns that didn't match the day's activity. Shadows stretched longer at night than they should. Objects were out of place, moved but not by anyone in the house. Friends who visited noticed it but laughed nervously, insisting it was just an old house settling. Daniel and Clara knew better. The house mirrored their own lives in a strange way, fractured, unpredictable, and holding secrets that refused to stay buried. Outside, the town began to feel the tension even if they didn't understand it fully. People claimed the air around the blue house was colder, heavier. Stories spread that something inside was shifting, that the couple's private struggles were starting to seep into the streets, like a fog no one could escape. Some said it was a warning. Others said it was proof of madness. Daniel and Clara became symbols, though no one really knew what they represented. They were living on the edge of something that the world couldn't label, something that refused to be explained in whispers or rumors. The nights grew longer in the blue house, stretching into hours that seemed to have no end. Daniel and Clara moved through them like ghosts, aware of each other's presence, but unable to bridge the distance that had quietly settled between them. Something had shifted, though neither could name it. Every glance carried suspicion. Every movement felt heavier. The small piece they had once clung to now seemed fragile, as if one wrong step would shatter it completely. Outside, the town buzzed with gossip and unease, sensing a storm on the horizon, though no one could see the clouds yet. Daniel's restlessness became more pronounced. He started pacing the rooms at night, muttering phrases under his breath that Clara couldn't understand. Sometimes he would stop abruptly, staring at corners of the house as if someone or something was there. Clara tried to watch him, to understand what he was doing, but he avoided her gaze, his silence louder than any confession. She began to feel that Daniel was slipping away, not from her love, but into a world that only he could enter. And Clara, for all her strength, began to feel that same pull, like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't control. The letters and notes from the past resurfaced, arriving at odd times and places, increasing the tension inside the house. Clara found one wedged under her pillow, another left on the kitchen counter, each one cryptic, carrying warnings and fragmented messages that made no sense when read in isolation. They spoke of truths, of danger, of choices that had consequences beyond their understanding. She shared one with Daniel. His reaction was a quiet clench of the jaw, a storm in his eyes that she didn't dare confront. He stuffed the notes into a drawer and locked it, but Clara knew that locking things away never made them disappear. The blue house itself seemed to react to the mounting tension. Windows rattled without wind, doors creaked on their own, and the old floorboards groaned under invisible weight. Clara began to hear whispers in the hallways at night, low and almost melodic, calling names she refused to answer. Daniel, too, acknowledged the sounds, but he did so with a silent understanding rather than fear. The house had become more than a home. It was alive, an extension of their fractured reality, amplifying every doubt and fear that had taken root between them. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the floor, Clara noticed Daniel staring out the window with a strange intensity. He didn't speak and she didn't ask. She could feel that something was coming, something that would change everything. Their neighbors noticed the tension too. Whispers carried through the town about the couple in the blue house, some saying they were on the brink of disaster, others wondering if they were witnessing something extraordinary that no one else could understand. Fear, curiosity, and fascination clashed in the air around them, pressing against the walls and seeping through the cracks. Daniel's behavior became unpredictable. Some nights, he would retreat into long silences, eyes fixed on nothing. Other nights, he would speak in sudden bursts, revealing pieces of the past, fragments of a story he had never shared with anyone. Clara listened, heart racing, as he mentioned people and events she had no knowledge of. She realized that the man she thought she knew was only partially visible, and that the deeper truths of his life were far more complex and dangerous than she had imagined. Clara herself began to unravel under the weight of unspoken fears. She stopped singing, stopped pacing, stopped pretending that she was untouchable. Her eyes, once bright with defiance, now flickered with doubt and concern. She began to watch Daniel with a careful intensity, searching for signs of what he might do next, fearing the decisions he might make without her knowing. The bond they shared was no longer a source of comfort. It was a tether pulling them both toward an unknown precipice. Then came the night when the external world broke through in an impossible way. A visitor appeared at the blue house, someone Daniel hadn't mentioned, someone from a past he had tried to bury. The figure's presence alone sent Clara's heart into her throat. The stranger spoke little, but the weight of their words was enough to silence the house. They left behind a message, an object, and a warning. Daniel's calm shattered for the first time, his hands trembling as he took it in. Clara felt her own fear spike, realizing that whatever had been approaching them quietly had finally arrived. The tension between them reached its peak when the lights in the house began to flicker violently that same night. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, moving in ways that didn't match reality. The air was heavy, filled with electricity, with the unspoken knowledge that something was about to happen. Daniel and Clara stood in the middle of the living room, hands brushing but not holding, hearts pounding, each aware that the world they had built, fragile as it was, could collapse at any second. The sound of the river, once a source of calm, became a warning. Clara heard it rushing faster, louder, carrying echoes of the past and hints of danger. She turned to Daniel, searching his face for answers, but found only fear mirrored in his eyes. Outside, the town could sense the shift too, though no one knew exactly why. A storm was coming, one that would not be weathered by distance or ignorance. Every object, every note, every whisper seemed to converge in that moment. The house, the river, their pasts, the town's eyes, all of it pressed against them, demanding resolution. Clara's hands shook. Daniel's breathing grew heavier. The night stretched into something eternal, charged with a tension that neither could release. Every sound, every shadow, felt like a signal that the story was about to reach a breaking point, but no one, not even them, knew what form that breaking point would take. As the clock ticked past midnight, the atmosphere thickened. Daniel moved toward a door that had remained locked for years, a place in the house he rarely visited. Clara followed, silent, heart pounding, knowing instinctively that whatever lay beyond would change everything. The shadows seemed to follow them, curling around their feet, twisting along the walls. The house was alive, and it was watching. In the final moments before the door opened, a scream echoed from outside. The river again, or something else entirely. The tension was unbearable. Daniel's hand hovered over the doorknob, his face pale, muscles tense, and Clara's fingers grazed his arm. For a brief second, time itself seemed to pause. They both knew that whatever lay behind that door, whatever confrontation awaited them, could unravel their lives in ways that no one in the town could have imagined. And in that frozen moment, as the house held its breath and the night seemed to wait with them, the story reached the edge of the unknown. The climax was not yet revealed, but the storm was here. The collision of past, present, and hidden truths was inevitable. Every whispered rumor, every hidden secret, every shadowed fear had led to this point. And neither Daniel nor Clara could escape what was coming. The air hung heavy with anticipation, the kind that grips your chest and refuses to let go. Outside, the river rushed relentlessly. Inside, the blue house groaned and creaked as if echoing the tension. Daniel's hand finally touched the doorknob. Clara held her breath, and the world around them seemed to wait, trembling, for the moment when everything would either fall apart or be forever changed. Daniel's fingers hovered over the doorknob, cold and unsteady, when suddenly the floor beneath him shuddered. It wasn't a quake, not really, but a tremor of the house itself, or perhaps something inside it. Clara instinctively grabbed his arm, eyes wide, heart hammering. Shadows seemed to twist unnaturally along the walls, as though the room itself had decided to join in the tension. The air smelled faintly of smoke and damp earth. Even though nothing was burning, nothing was wet. Daniel's grip on the doorknob tightened, and for the first time in weeks, fear flickered across his face, raw and unshielded. Before he could turn the knob, a sharp knock echoed from the back door. 1, 2, 3. Clara froze. The sound was deliberate, urgent, impossible to ignore. Who could it be at this hour? Who had come to the blue house, knowing the stories, knowing the danger? Daniel glanced at her, eyes dark and unreadable, and whispered, "Stay here." His voice, usually quiet and controlled, carried an edge of desperation that made Clara's chest tighten. Something was happening, something that neither of them had anticipated. The moment stretched. Another knock, louder this time, and then silence. Clara could hear the river again, rushing with a strange intensity, as if it was carrying warnings she could not decipher. Her mind raced through possibilities. A visitor from the past, a townsperson who had finally decided to intervene, or something else entirely. Something they hadn't considered. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to flee the blue house and escape whatever was approaching, but she couldn't. She was tethered here, bound to Daniel and the strange pull between them that had grown impossible to ignore. Daniel finally moved toward the back door, each step deliberate, each footfall echoing through the still house. Clara followed, silently, sensing the gravity of the moment. When he opened it, there was no one there. Just the wind, cold and sharp, rattling the old boards. But something had changed. On the doorstep lay a small black box. No note, no explanation, just the box, heavy and ominous. Daniel bent to pick it up, and Clara felt a chill creep down her spine. Neither spoke. Words felt useless here, incapable of expressing the dread that filled the air. Inside the box, Daniel found an object that made him freeze. It was a locket, tarnished with age, but unmistakable. He opened it slowly, and inside was a photograph of a woman he had not seen in years, someone he had tried to forget, someone tied to secrets he had buried deep. His breath caught. Clara leaned in, peering over his shoulder, but she could barely make out the face. Daniel's hands trembled as he closed the locket and held it tight against his chest, as if the simple act of holding it could anchor him to reality. But the reality was shifting fast, and the locket was only the beginning. Suddenly, a voice called from the darkness outside. Low, steady, and chillingly familiar. Daniel's eyes widened. Clara recognized the tone too, though she could not place it at first. Whoever it was, they knew him. They knew everything. And now they were here. Daniel's past, which he thought he had left behind, was no longer a distant memory. It had arrived at their doorstep. The tension inside the house escalated instantly. Clara felt her heart racing, adrenaline sharpening her senses. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow, every rustle of wind against the windows felt amplified. The house itself seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's jaw tightened. He was no longer the calm, controlled man who had once guided Clara through their fragile life together. Now he was a man on the edge, facing forces he could neither predict nor easily confront. And then came the second twist, a sound that made both of them freeze. The river outside, which had always been a source of quiet or occasional dread, erupted with a strange, unnatural noise. It was not water flowing, it was something moving beneath the surface, something deliberate. Clara felt a wave of fear wash over her. Daniel stepped closer to the window, peering out into the darkness, but he could see nothing. Still, he knew. He knew that whatever it was connected to the locket, connected to the visitor, connected to the past he had spent years trying to escape. Clara realized in that moment that their lives were no longer theirs. The blue house, the river, the town, they were all pieces of a puzzle that had finally revealed itself. And the puzzle was far darker, far more dangerous than she could have imagined. She reached for Daniel's hand, and he grasped hers, a silent acknowledgement that they were in this together, for better or worse. But even their union felt fragile now, as if the smallest disturbance could send everything crashing down. Daniel's breathing grew heavier. He turned the locket over and over in his hand, examining it for clues, for answers, for any indication of what might come next. Clara's mind raced with possibilities. Who had sent the box? Was it a warning, a threat, or a trap? And what did it mean for the life they were trying to build together? The questions swirled around them, unrelenting, impossible to silence. The storm outside intensified. Rain lashed against the windows. Lightning flashed over the river, and the house seemed to shiver with each gust of wind. Inside, every creak and groan of the old structure felt like a heartbeat, counting down to something inevitable. Daniel and Clara knew, without speaking, that the moment of reckoning was near. The secrets that had haunted them, the past they had tried to escape, and the love that bound them together were all converging in one relentless, unstoppable force. And as they stood there, hand in hand, staring at the black box and the locket inside. The realization hit them both. Nothing would ever be the same again. The second plot twist had arrived, shattering whatever fragile balance they had achieved. The stakes were higher than ever. The danger was closer than they had imagined. And the climax, the point at which all their fears and secrets would collide, was now unavoidable. Every heartbeat, every breath, every shadow felt like a warning. The house, the river, the night itself, all of it conspired to push them toward a moment that would demand choices, courage, and truth. The tension was unbearable. The air seemed thick enough to choke on. And yet, in the midst of fear, Daniel and Clara knew they had no choice but to face what was coming, even if it threatened to destroy them completely. Outside, the unknown waited, patient and merciless. Inside, the blue house trembled under the weight of secrets, fear, and anticipation. Daniel clutched the locket tighter. Clara gripped his hand harder. And in the quiet, in the eye of the storm, the story teetered on the edge of the unimaginable, hurtling them toward a climax that neither love nor madness could prepare them for. The night stretched endlessly, filled with shadows, whispers, and the promise of revelation. Whatever waited beyond the door, beyond the river, beyond the fragile boundaries of their lives, was coming. And Daniel and Clara had no choice but to meet it head-on, even as the second twist reminded them that the world they thought they knew was only a fragile illusion, ready to be shattered in an instant. The night had fallen completely, and the blue house stood in eerie silence, the river nearby reflecting the silver glow of the moon. Daniel and Clara had spent the day preparing, knowing something had to happen, though neither could predict exactly what. The locket, the black box, and all the lingering secrets from the past now sat on the dining table, a tangible representation of the chaos that had shadowed their lives. For weeks, they had avoided confrontation, tiptoed around truth, but now there was no escaping it. Tonight, everything would be revealed. A sudden knock echoed through the house, sharp and deliberate, breaking the quiet in a way that made their hearts jump. Clara instinctively grabbed Daniel's arm, and he nodded, a silent agreement that this was it. He opened the door slowly, expecting to find a stranger from the past or some new threat. But there was no one. Only a single envelope, plain and unmarked, lying on the doorstep. Daniel picked it up carefully, sensing its weight, not heavy, but charged, as if it contained something the air itself wanted to guard. Inside was a single letter, written in handwriting that was eerily familiar. It wasn't from an enemy, nor from someone they had met. It was from Daniel's long-lost sister, a person everyone in the town believed had vanished years ago. The words inside were both a confession and a warning. She had left long ago to escape a life that had suffocated her, but she had been watching Daniel from afar, following every move, understanding the shadows that haunted him. She revealed secrets about their childhood, about the events that had shaped him, and about Clara, about why the universe, in its strange way, had brought them together. Daniel's face turned pale as he read aloud, each word unlocking memories he had long buried. Clara listened, gripping his hand tightly, feeling the weight of the revelations. The letter explained that the woman in the locket was not just a part of Daniel's past. She had been a distant cousin, someone whose life had intertwined with his in ways neither of them understood until now. The misunderstandings, the fears, the strange disturbances, they had all stemmed from secrets no one had shared, and now the truth was finally out. Then the twist came, a twist no one could have anticipated. Hidden in the envelope was a key, small and unassuming, but its presence was deliberate. The letter explained that the key opened a compartment in the riverbank, a place Daniel had played as a child but never explored. It contained documents and artifacts that proved the family's history was even more entangled than he knew, connecting him to events that had shaped the town itself. Suddenly, the house, the river, and their own lives weren't just personal. They were part of a larger story, a legacy of choices, secrets, and survival. Without hesitation, Daniel and Clara followed the instructions. The river was cold, the night damp, but they moved together, steady despite the fear twisting in their stomachs. When Daniel finally inserted the key into the hidden compartment, it clicked open. Inside were journals, old letters, and even photographs that explained everything: the origins of the disturbances in the house, the shadows in the river, the mysterious visitors, and the events that had kept them under a cloud of fear for so long. The revelations were overwhelming, but they also brought clarity. Every unanswered question, every unexplained moment, finally made sense. As they emerged from the riverbank compartment, clutching the journals and letters, Daniel looked at Clara with a mix of relief and disbelief. "It's all been here waiting," he said. "All of it. The past, the secrets, the answers we needed." Clara nodded, tears in her eyes, feeling a mix of triumph and exhaustion. They had faced every hidden threat, every shadow, every lingering fear. The main conflicts, the haunting of the house, the mysterious letters, the past that had chased them, had finally been resolved. But just as they turned to head back to the blue house, the final twist hit. A faint, almost imperceptible sound came from the house itself, a low hum, vibrating through the walls, the floor, and even the air around them. It wasn't natural. Daniel and Clara exchanged a look, fear and curiosity mingling in equal measure. The locket and the box had resolved the human secrets, but the house, it seemed, still held one final secret of its own. A compartment in the floorboards shifted on its own, revealing a small, hidden mechanism that neither of them had noticed before. Inside the mechanism was a single, unmarked note. The handwriting was not familiar, but the message was simple and chilling. "You are ready, but the story is never truly over." Daniel and Clara stared at each other, understanding immediately that the house itself had been a silent witness and participant in everything they had endured. The journey of facing fears, confronting secrets, and surviving madness was over, but the world they lived in, the one filled with unexpected twists and legacies, would continue to test them. The climax was complete. They had confronted the past, resolved the mysteries, and survived the tension that had once threatened to consume them. Daniel held Clara close, their hearts finally synchronized in a quiet rhythm of relief. They had endured the madness of the past, the intensity of secrets, and the uncertainty of the unknown. Yet the final twist reminded them, gently but firmly, that life story is always ongoing. Love, courage, and resilience would guide them forward, but the shadows of the past and the unexpected challenges of the future would always linger. As dawn broke over the river and the blue house, Daniel and Clara returned inside, exhausted but triumphant. The journals and letters were carefully stored, the locket safely locked away, and the black box sealed. The house, once a place of fear and chaos, felt alive in a new way, watchful, yes, but no longer threatening. Outside, the town breathed a little easier, sensing that the couple had finally found balance. Yet, for those who had followed the story, the hint of the final note left lingering suspense, a reminder that even the most resolved conflicts carry the possibility of new beginnings, new twists, and new discoveries. In the quiet of the morning, Daniel and Clara finally allowed themselves a moment of stillness. They had faced the madness of the past, confronted the secrets that haunted their lives, and survived the tension that had defined their existence. Their love, tested by fear, mystery, and uncertainty, had endured. They had learned that survival is not about avoiding darkness, but about facing it together. And while the final twist had reminded them that life's mysteries are never truly gone, they also knew that they had the strength, courage, and unity to face whatever came next. The blue house, the river, the town, and the secrets all had played their part in shaping a story of love, resilience, and unexpected truths. Daniel and Clara's journey ended that night not with fear or defeat, but with understanding, reflection, and a sense of hope. They had survived the chaos, embraced the unexpected, and discovered that even in the most unpredictable of circumstances, human courage and love could prevail. And as the sun rose higher, spilling warm light across the blue house and sparkling on the river, Daniel and Clara stood together, ready to face life, not with trepidation, but with clarity, strength, and the quiet knowledge that, though life will always bring twists, they could endure them as long as they faced the world side by side. The story had reached its resolution, every mystery unraveled, every conflict faced, and every shadow accounted for, leaving a lasting impression of suspense, triumph, and the power of human resilience. The storm outside finally began to ease, though the tension inside the blue house lingered, thick and heavy. Daniel and Clara stood together, hands still intertwined, staring at the black box and the locket that had changed everything. For hours, neither spoke, both trying to make sense of the chaos that had erupted around them. Outside, the river calmed, its relentless rush softened to a murmur, as if nature itself was finally taking a breath. Inside, the house seemed to relax too, settling back into its old rhythm, though the echoes of the night's events remained. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and steady, but carrying the weight of weeks of fear and uncertainty. This locket, it belonged to someone I thought I'd left behind. Someone who made my past unbearable. His hands shook slightly as he held it out to Clara. I hid this life, these secrets, because I didn't want to drag you into it. But hiding never worked, did it? Clara shook her head, squeezing his hand in reassurance. We can't change the past, she said softly, but we can face it together. That's what matters now. They opened the locket again, this time together. Inside were photographs, letters, and fragments of memories that revealed a story Daniel had never shared with anyone. It was a story of loss, regret, and survival. The woman in the photograph had been someone he once loved deeply, someone whose absence had shaped the man he became. Reading her letters, Daniel realized he had been carrying guilt for far too long, guilt that had poisoned his peace and seeped into every aspect of his life. Clara's presence, her love and patience, had been his anchor, but even love could not erase secrets that had never been faced. Clara listened silently as Daniel read aloud, each word pulling pieces of the puzzle into place. She began to understand the complexity of the man she had married, the depth of his struggles, and the courage it took for him to survive the past. At the same time, she recognized her own fears, the moments when she had doubted herself, when the shadows of the house and the river had felt unbearable. Together, they confronted the ghosts that had haunted them, acknowledging that their lives had been shaped as much by unseen forces as by the choices they had made. Once the locket and its contents were fully examined, Daniel and Clara made a decision. They would not run from the past any longer. They would not hide in fear of what others thought, or of the mysteries that had once seemed too dangerous to face. Instead, they would take control of their lives together. Daniel carefully placed the locket back in the black box, then locked it away in a drawer that he and Clara both agreed upon. It was a symbolic act, an acknowledgement that the past could not be changed, but it could be understood, contained, and ultimately learned from. The next morning, the town noticed a shift. The blue house no longer carried the same heavy aura of dread. Daniel and Clara emerged together, walking hand in hand along the riverbank, calm and deliberate. People whispered, as always, but this time the whispers were tempered with curiosity rather than fear. The couple's presence exuded a quiet strength, a reminder that surviving darkness required more than isolation. It required facing it, and doing so with courage and honesty. Clara returned to her singing, this time more confident and free than before. Her voice carried through the town, not with manic intensity, but with the raw honesty that had always been her gift. Children paused to listen. Neighbors smiled from a distance, and even the river seemed to respond, its gentle flow harmonizing with her melody. Daniel, too, found solace in small acts of kindness once more, helping neighbors, feeding stray animals, and repairing broken furniture. They were not perfect, they never would be, but they had found balance in a life that had once seemed impossible. The black box and its secrets remained, but their power had diminished. No longer did they dictate Daniel and Clara's lives. Instead, they served as reminders of what had been endured, lessons in resilience and love. The couple learned that confronting fear directly, rather than running from it, could transform even the most chaotic circumstances into opportunities for growth. It was a lesson that resonated deeply, a guiding principle for a life that had once been defined by shadows. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Clara strengthened their bond. They discovered new ways to communicate, new rituals that grounded them, and new strategies for handling the unexpected. Arguments still happened, as they always do in any marriage, but these conflicts were met with understanding rather than fear. Every challenge they faced together became a proof of their resilience, a testament to the love that had weathered both madness and mystery. The town, too, began to shift its perception. Fear gave way to fascination, fascination to respect. People realized that Daniel and Clara were not the tragic figures they had assumed. They were survivors, people who had faced unimaginable tension and confusion and had emerged stronger, wiser, and united. The Blue House, once a symbol of dread, became a symbol of endurance. Its walls, which had echoed with whispers and shadows, now rang with life, laughter, and a sense of quiet triumph. Daniel and Clara often returned to the river, the site of so many pivotal moments. They would sit together in silence, or talk softly about dreams for the future. The river no longer carried fear, but a sense of continuity, a reminder that life moves forward, even after storms. Every glance between them, every shared smile, was proof that they had survived not just the chaos of the past, but the complexity of human emotion and the uncertainty of life itself. By confronting the secrets and fears that had once threatened to overwhelm them, Daniel and Clara discovered something remarkable. Love, true love, is not the absence of conflict or mystery. It is the courage to face them together, to navigate the unpredictable currents of life with trust and commitment. They had both been labeled madman, madwoman, but those labels could no longer define them. They were something stronger, something human, and infinitely more resilient than anyone had imagined. As the sun set on the Blue House, casting a warm glow across the river, Daniel and Clara stood together on the porch, hands entwined, hearts steady. The town looked on from a distance, now respectful rather than fearful, understanding that life's most profound lessons are often learned in the shadows, and that resilience and love can overcome even the most complex challenges. The story of the madman and the madwoman ended not in chaos or tragedy, but in understanding and growth. Their journey, marked by fear, secrets, and tension, concluded with reflection and clarity. The audience, having followed their struggles, witnessed the transformation from uncertainty to balance, from isolation to connection. Daniel and Clara's lives were forever changed, but they emerged stronger, proving that even in the most challenging circumstances, love, courage, and honesty can guide people toward hope and renewal. And as the night settled over the town, the river whispered softly, the house creaked with contentment, and Daniel and Clara finally allowed themselves to rest. The past had been faced, the secrets understood, and the future awaited, a future they would meet together, with courage, love, and a profound sense of human resilience. The Blue House was no longer a place of fear, but a home of lessons learned, a symbol of triumph over uncertainty, and a reminder that even the most unexpected love stories can have a meaningful and inspiring ending.